Let's just look and review a few things. Let's look at the classified documents case. One individual is Vice President of the United States, removes documents which he has no right to do, Joe Biden. He then removes documents also before he was Vice President as a U.S. Senator, no right to do that, doesn't have the right to declassify. Yet a special counsel is appointed, and the result of that is that, well, there's nothing we're going to do because he's a kindly older gentleman that has a bad memory and it wouldn't be a good case. And yet at the same time, a president of the United States who does have a right to declassify documents, removes them, keeps them in a secure place, has the right to do it because he was a president and he's indicted. Do you think it's appropriate? Do you think someone who's being interviewed for a position when they're going to be appointed, or somebody who is running for office and is going to be elected at this level of government in the judiciary should say what they want to do as far as putting somebody in jail before they've even seen the case? Is that appropriate, yes or no?
Your description of the Herr and Smith cases is inaccurate. I don't know whether your description of what the two district attorneys said.
Well, then you don't look at the news. Excuse me, Attorney General, because I only have a limited amount of time. Everywhere it was reported. It was, if you knew anything, you knew that Alvin Bragg and also, again, the prosecutor in Fulton County, Georgia, they ran on that. And that's wrong. That isn't equal justice for all. It's wrong. Are you aware that on May 3rd, Special Counsel Smith himself acknowledged in a court filing that after the FBI seized evidence that, and it's right on Mar-a-Lago, that some of the evidence was altered, manipulated, or disturbed? Is that standard procedure?
I have not read anywhere where he said it was altered or manipulated. So again, I can't accept that characterization.
Mr. Attorney General, I want to be respectful, man. Are you living in a bubble here? I mean,
I'm not living in a bubble, but
good
your
God, it was
characterization
seen.
is
I mean,
false.
everybody saw it. Everybody heard it. Smith himself said it. That's why that case was stopped.
If you can show me where he said he manipulated the evidence, I'll have a different.
You don't like my word, but that there was some tampering, and absolutely he said that he had touched the evidence, and we don't know what level. And now Americans are concerned, God knows what level it is and whether we'll really know the truth. And I got a question about this. Former President Trump, as you know, was being dragged through a political travesty, and you won't agree that it's a travesty, orchestrated by Alvin Bragg.
Mr. Attorney General, it would be inappropriate for you to opine on the nature of pending and active prosecutions, correct?
Yes, there's a Justice Department policy against making those kind of comments.
It's a long-standing precedent.
Yes.
The reason why I bring that up, I have great respect for my colleague from New Jersey. I understand he is not a lawyer by training, and the world needs good dentists, so it's nothing against his career choices. But I will just simply say, I find it shameful to have to endure, and I can only imagine how you feel about it, Mr. Attorney General, the lectures from some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle about equal justice under the law or adherence to the rule of law to a man who has spent virtually his entire career in pursuit of upholding the rule of law.
Republicans have had a majority in this House for 11 months. And what do they have to show for it? Nothing. No efforts to grow the middle class, no efforts to lower costs, no efforts to build safer communities. Instead, an effort to default on our nation's debt, 2 attempts to shut down the government, vacating their own speaker, and now a baseless impeachment that they are pursuing for one reason and one reason alone, because former President Trump ordered them to do so. You ask them to articulate what crime they are investigating, they can't give you an answer. You ask them to identify any evidence of wrongdoing by President Biden, crickets. Mr. Speaker, the American people, I can assure you, are deeply disappointed in the actions that House Republicans have taken for the better part of the last year. And this action is no different. I urge my colleagues, reject this farce of a process, and let's get back to doing the important work that the American people expect us to do. I guess what I really would like for you to help expound to me is where you draw the line when it comes to what you describe as too much government. You said there's too much government in selecting one's toaster, I guess, or one's refrigerator, apparently, or one's washer and dryer. You went through this litany of examples. Where do you draw the line?
Where do I draw the line on what?
Yeah, how do you see, you take issue with the federal government's role, in this case, with respect to the bill that you all have proposed. Where do you draw the line as to how much government is too much government?
Well, there's 17 enumerated powers in the United States Constitution, and I think government has well exceeded that. I think a return to a smaller, limited federal government
Sure.
is better.
Okay.
That's how our founders envisioned this.
That's helpful. That's what I was hoping you would say. You believe there's too much government in appliances, or the selection thereof. Do you think there's too much government in baseball?
I don't think government has a role in baseball.
You don't think government has a role in baseball? That's fascinating. Are you familiar with the Competition in Professional Baseball Act?
Well, there's some antitrust laws.
No, I didn't ask you that. I asked if you're familiar with that bill. I mean, I hope you'd be familiar with it because it's your bill.
I am, yeah.
Right? Yeah. You authored the Competition in Professional Baseball Act. That bill does what? It amends the Clayton Act to ultimately eliminate one of the antitrust exemptions that exists for professional baseball. You're familiar with the Clayton Act, yes?
I am.
And the Clayton Act is designed to do what? Protect consumers, is that right? Is the Clayton Act part of the 17 enumerated powers of the federal government under the Constitution as you see it, that you hold so true and fast to?
Probably.
Probably? Okay, so looks like we found an exception. Maybe we can go down the list of some others. You see my point, Mr. Duncan.
I said it's too much government.
Oh, yeah, I understand, but apparently too much government in the case of the bill that you proposed, but not too much government in the case of professional baseball.
The question today is, do you trust the government? We often hear the claim that it's for your safety. And anytime the government tells us it's for your safety, the American people really question what that means. The same intelligence community that spied on President Trump's campaign has been deeply invested in reauthorizing FISA. And the same intelligence community that wrote the letter lying, saying that the Hunter Biden's laptop is not real, deeply wants FISA reauthorized. And if the government really cared about protecting Americans, then they would shut the border down and mass deport terrorists out of our country and criminal illegal aliens. But they're not doing that. No, they're telling us we've got to reauthorize FISA so the government can continue to spy on Americans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to read from an article from a few days ago. This is from Fox 5 in Atlanta. The headline, Marjorie Taylor Greene standing by eclipse, NE earthquake comments. Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is standing by comments she made about last week's earthquake in the Northeast and Monday's eclipse. Again, this is quoting from the article here, that the Republican representative then posted on Twitter, the social media site formerly known as X, formerly known as Twitter, that, quote, God is sending America strong signs to tell us to repent. Greene also pointed to Monday's eclipse, saying there are, quote, many more things to come, end quote. So to the extent that my friend from Kentucky was looking for me to make a connection here to the debate that we're having, I suspect it's self-evident, but I'm not so sure that the American people should necessarily be taking much stock into the arguments that are being made by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, including the speaker that we just heard from.
You talked a bit about your professional background. You started at the Department of Justice as a line prosecutor. I know you served as a special assistant prior to that, but the bulk of your early career at the Department of Justice was a line prosecutor.
Yes.
Drug trafficking, organized crime, violent crime cases.
Yes.
You then proceeded to become the principal associate deputy attorney general.
Yes. Long title.
Long title, important job. And in that capacity, you oversaw a series of very important criminal prosecutions, including the prosecutions connected to the Oklahoma City bombing. Is that right?
Yes.
You were nominated and you were confirmed on a bipartisan basis here in Washington, D.C., to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals.
Yes.
You rose to Chief Judge of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals.
I think that just meant I survived my colleagues, yes.
That may be, Mr. Attorney General, but what I can say with confidence is that you have a more distinguished record with respect to fidelity to the rule of law than any member sitting on the dais here today on either side of the aisle. And I appreciate your integrity, your leadership of the department, and to be candid, your patience during the bulk of this hearing, which of course has focused on virtually every issue unconnected to the bulk of the work that is done by our nation's premier law enforcement agency. I've been in and out of this hearing. I believe it's correct that you haven't gotten any questions about cybercrime, let's say, for example.
That's right.
Fair enough. Or foreign espionage.
Right.
I know during your opening statement you talked about the decisive action that the Department of Justice is taking in coordination with the DEA and the FBI against cartels. Very few questions about that today from my colleagues, unfortunately, unless I'm wrong.
You're right.
A litany of work that's being done each and every day at the Department of Justice that has a real impact on people's lives in terms of keeping our communities safe, keeping Americans safe. This was supposed to be, I thought, an oversight hearing for the Department of Justice. And unfortunately, it has descended into a lot of rhetoric about conspiracy theories and the like. I think it's a wasted opportunity to actually engage with you and your department about the issues that the American people care deeply about. And so I will spend the remaining amount of my time left talking about an issue that's deeply important to me, and I know an issue that's important to you, which is the scourge of gun violence. And the department has taken a leadership role under your tenure in the last several years, particularly as it relates to implementing the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which was a bipartisan bill that this Congress passed thanks to President Biden's leadership. And I wonder if you might just opine a bit or expound a bit on your work as it relates to gun violence.
Well, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act has been extraordinarily helpful in our effort to combat gun violence. It's led to substantial numbers of prohibited sales of guns to minors who the statutes prohibit possessing because of conduct that they have engaged in. It's given us the authority to bring cases for straw purchasing that's led to crime guns and to gun trafficking to criminals, and in those ways has helped drive down the numbers with respect to gun violence. We have set up crime gun intelligence centers so that our state and local counterparts can trace guns that are found at crime scenes to determine whether they were used by serial killers, by serial shooters, to help us find out, to run the DNA off of the casings so that we can find hits on those people and arrest them and prevent them from committing further crimes. There's a host of things that the department has done, but the principal kind of violence we're worried about in the country is gun violence. That's what causes the enormous number of deaths we face every year.
I thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for your service to our country, and I hope you'll relay the same to all the folks at the Department of Justice, and I thank the chairman for his indulgence. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Duncan and Ranking Member Pallone, for your testimony and for being here today. Mr. Duncan, I don't want to belabor the point here, but I listened with great interest to your primer on the constitutional order of our country and the principles of limited government as you see it, and your perceptions about supposed overreach by the federal government in this case that apparently was the impetus for the Hands Off Our Home Appliances Act. I think House Republicans at least were wise enough to keep the rest of their bills, the Refrigerator Freedom Act and the like, from the floor this week. But nonetheless, I listened to that primer with great interest. Some of the words you used, just in response to my colleague from New York's questions, were too much government, freedom to choose, which of course is, ironic given the position of House Republicans in undermining the right, the freedom to make one's own health reproductive decisions. You introduced a bill in the last Congress to give the FTC more powers so that it could regulate professional baseball. So you could imagine, I think, my surprise, and I suspect for those who are watching, their surprise to hear you defend liberty for refrigerators, but then demand that the federal government intervene in the regulation of professional baseball. I find that a bit disconnected from the philosophy that you've articulated. But I'm happy to...
Well, there's already antitrust laws out there that baseball has to operate under. And trying to roll back some of that is lessening government's involvement.
Yeah, again, that's not the nature of your bill. The bill provides for an amendment of
the laws already exist.
Let me finish my statement here. The Clayton Act, which, as you know, is over 100 years old, does not include baseball, and the courts, going back a generation, have ruled that professional baseball is not subject to the antitrust laws of the United States of America. You, sir, have introduced a bill to mandate that professional baseball be subject to the antitrust laws of the United States and to give the Federal Trade Commission the powers to regulate it thereof. You shouldn't be embarrassed by it. That's your position.
Because there were antitrust violations. And so the antitrust laws, I didn't write. The
I hear you.
antitrust laws were on the books.
And apparently you believe
And
that
baseball was
it's in
given
the
an exemption.
interest of the American public for the federal government to have a role to protecting consumers, which you've spent the better part of the last half hour attacking that very view.
Antitrust laws fall under commerce, which the federal government enumerated powers to regulate.
Sure. Well, you have a broader view of the Commerce Clause than certainly than apparently the framers that you were describing previously. But to the extent that you care to jump in, Ranking Member Pallone, about the regulation of professional baseball, you're welcome to. But
talk about baseball, but I just think, look, this kind of goes back to what Congresswoman Scanlon said, right? The public assumes that the government has a role in protecting consumers, right? Whether it's baseball, it's food safety, it's appliances, whatever. And so I think that to suggest that there's some kind of ideological view that says that the government shouldn't play that role is not the case. That's what the public assumes. And they'd be shocked to hear, I think, some of the statements here today suggesting that, you know, we just have this market economy where anything goes and the federal government shouldn't step in and regulate things. That's not what I hear from my constituents. They want us to regulate problems if there's, I don't know what there is, but let's assume there's some kind of shady dealings in baseball. They want to make sure that when they go to the game, there's fair play. Same thing with food safety, same thing with appliances. They rely on us to help them as consumers, and to suggest that that somehow is not what the framers intended, I don't agree.
couldn't say better than the ranking member, and couldn't agree with you more. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Today's rule, put simply, is a testament to the Republican playbook since assuming the majority 15 months ago. Chaos, gridlock, and infighting. Over the past year, honestly, it has been difficult to understand what my colleagues across the aisle truly want. At the beginning of this Congress, the other side of the aisle voted for a House rules package that they promised would entail an open rules process for amendments. Yet this Congress is on pace to have more closed rules than any Congress in the last 100 years, over a century. A minority of House Republicans now dictate what proposals will even have a chance to be considered in this chamber, to stand in the marketplace of ideas that our colleagues claim to love so dearly. Our colleagues across the other side of the aisle reject compromises at every turn, Mr. Speaker. My Republican colleagues rejected a bipartisan immigration deal that came out of the Senate before even reading the bill text. The bill passed with 70 votes, Mr. Speaker, 70 votes in the United States Senate. Our allies around the world have literally been left stranded. And House Republicans won't even bring the bill up for an up or down vote. Instead, Their top priority, the Refrigerator Freedom Act. Refrigerator Freedom Act, Mr. Speaker. The American people deserve better. They expect better. Enough of the political stunts, enough of the infighting. Let's get back to work, Mr. Speaker. I urge my colleagues to oppose the previous question and the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.